Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the Football Diary podcast. Let's talk about a really tasty title. Hang on, no, that's already done, isn't it? Let's talk about a really tasty relegation. No, that's done as well. Miles, where should we start? The rest of the league, I suppose? That seems pretty exciting, doesn't it? Quite a few games to talk about, though, for the top four in the European race that are really chopping and changing week on week, including Newcastle and Forest in a 4-3 win for Newcastle, Villa against Chelsea in a 2-1 win for the Villains, and Arsenal once again slipping up against West Ham 1-0, pretty much handing the title to Liverpool at this stage, isn't it? Obviously, we'll talk about Man City Liverpool too and what permutations that has, if any, at this stage. But either way, the Premier League doesn't really fail to deliver, does it? It was a few entertaining games there, wasn't it, Miles? How have you found this weekend?
I think you're right. It's all about that one particular area of the league now, and obviously that's an area that really suits me to be watching. So I've found this weekend great. I don't think many teams had a better weekend than Villa, really, when you look at the fixtures around. Maybe us and Newcastle, we're the winners, so we'll start with them, I guess, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think top of the billing, really, because obviously Nottingham Forest in there too. They've got a tough running ahead of them, so they really couldn't have afforded to drop points here, but they have. But Newcastle took the game to Forest, didn't they, from the first half? 4-3 winners in the end, but I think by, 35, 40 minutes, Newcastle went 4-1 up. It absolutely looked like Newcastle were going to blitz Forest. So to Forest's credit, they came back into the game really well in the second half, but that first half was a bit of a Newcastle masterclass. They sussed out the way Forest had set up and kind of exploited that quite nicely, didn't they?
Yeah, and you can just see the confidence that's running through this Newcastle team. The way that they scored each of the goals really just felt like a team that are on the ascendancy. And Newcastle have been kind of indifferent really with their form at times, and you can see how much class there is in that first 11, and that gets them a lot of results. But then they drop points in games where you think that they're a certainty for it. Otherwise, they would be where Forest are right now, really. Yeah. You'd imagine that if they could have found some consistency, that this would have been a really good season for them to kick on. This is a massive result for them, because all of a sudden it does open up that conversation again, which is really what Newcastle are aiming for. And when you've got players like Alexander Isak, who the whole world is going to be after in the summer, holding on to him will be a huge thing for Newcastle, because the confidence that he showcases on the pitch, it feels like it's infectious for the rest of the team, and you've got everyone else trying to get in on the act, and he just leads that team by example every single week, it feels like. I mean, even his penalty, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, poor Matt Sells, it looks embarrassing because he falls over basically trying to stop it, and actually he gets really close to it. But the fact that Isak's even attempting that tells you where his kind of feelings are at right now and where Newcastle are.
Great to see, wasn't it? And we've talked about Sandro Tonali. He didn't start the game either. It was Lewis Miley in midfield, and I thought he acquitted himself really well too. Got on the score sheet as well. It was all looking really rosy at one point for Newcastle, wasn't it? But the second half changed everything, really. You expect Forest to come out fighting a little bit, and I think Forest fans will look at the approach of the first half and be disappointed with how deep they were, how much pressure they invited from Newcastle, which to their credit they exploited brilliantly. But the second half switch up to being a lot more front-footed seemed to really bring the game back into life, really, and it looked a foregone conclusion at half-time. Is the frustration there with Nuno that in a nutshell, basically, that change of approach that seems to make a difference when they do go on the front foot compared to absorbing the pressure?
Yeah, I think so, because for a lot of this season that has been something that Forest have done really successfully, absorb pressure when they've needed to and then countered quickly. But that's not going to work against every team that you face, and Newcastle are a really good example of that, because they're able to break down quite a low block whenever they need to. They've got players with the capabilities to unpick that lock, and Forest kind of suffered from that. And then in the second half, we saw them exploit quite a fragile Newcastle defence. I mean, they're missing some key players at the moment in the middle, so you knew Forest could outrun them in midfield. There's no Joel Linton, like you said, Tonali didn't start, so there was an opportunity there. No Botman at the back as well, so you've got two really young fullbacks and a centre-back partnership with Dan Burn and Fabian Schär, who have done a great job for Newcastle, but again, can be got at. And you saw that in the second half, because Forest tried to get at them, and the way that they exploited set pieces and the organisation of Newcastle's defence being quite lacklustre, that's really what Forest needed to be aiming to do from the get-go. You're right. And I mean, they started the game so fast. I mean, 1-0 up after 6 minutes, you're laughing, really, and you see what it means to have Hudson-Odoi back in the side, because he looked brilliant. But to then just let Newcastle come on to you for that long, and that period of, what was it, 12 minutes between the four goals, it just felt like their heads dropped and they just didn't know how to stop what was happening to them. And you worry that when Forest have been outperforming expectations all season, they're starting to hit a bit of adversity now. Like they've lost 3 in their last 4 with that mad 7-0 win against Brighton in the middle of it, and it feels like the team are starting to notice their position in the league table and feel a bit shaken by it. I wonder whether that's kind of a bit of the case. And it took the halftime team talk to say to them, no, remember what you've been doing well all season. Remember what you can do to teams to hurt them. And they went and did it in the second half. It just wasn't quite enough.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because when you do think about the game as it was happening, it did feel like a different mentality altogether. When that 4th Newcastle goal went in, heads definitely dropped. It felt like they were completely gone, like the game was going to only go one way. So, yeah, real credit to Nuno for turning it around with the team talk at half-time. But the impetus was so much different, and I was impressed by a lot of things that Forest did in the second half, and I think fans are frustrated that they don't do that from the off. Maybe it is a case of them just thinking, look where we are in the league. You know, we probably like a bit of an imposter syndrome thing. They don't deserve to be there, but the talent was there to see. I do think the midfield for Forest was a little bit off still. I think when Yates came on, he really changed the dynamic a little bit. But Elliot Anderson, I thought, had a good game. So they're getting there with that midfield balance. But what do they need to do to kind of stabilise themselves? Because there's a fear that this kind of result can really knock their confidence further.
I think the run of fixtures just doesn't help, and they've just got to get through this period with as many points on the board as possible. I mean, they got that result against Brighton. That was so huge for them. They've now got Arsenal and Man City in their next 2. So that run continues. But the problem is, it's teams around them that they're playing, and if they're dropping points for them, then they're going to find themselves... That area of the league table has been so congested, and Forest kind of sat just above it. It felt like they were a little distance away from being dragged into it. Now, all of a sudden, I think, they're 5 points ahead of Villa in 8th. I know Villa got a game in hand. But,
really
Forest got a game in hand, sorry. But it is getting a lot more close for Forest than they would like. And when you look at their upcoming fixtures, Arsenal, then they're back in the FA Cup, then Man City, then you're looking at these games against Ipswich and Man United, and you think, well, Forest have to go and get 6 points from that, because then they're back playing Villa after that, and all of a sudden it's another game where it's European contention on the line. We thought for a while that Forest were kind of cementing themselves as a top 4 side for the season, and now it's looking really close, because that's the nature of this league table this year. 100%. The teams in the middle just keep taking points off each other all the time, and there's no one really running away with it. And it felt like Forest were the team that were running away, and it feels like they've been clawed back into a race now, and that's going to be difficult for them.
Well, for Newcastle, on the other hand, obviously 5th now, and I think it's level on points with City now above them after their defeat to Liverpool. Goal difference separates them, so top 4 is definitely still on for Newcastle. I think you said their midfield obviously is missing a couple of key players, but I honestly thought Willock and Miley stepped in really well. I thought the energy remained there. The problem, like you mentioned earlier, is that defensive trio of Pope, who was back in, didn't look at his best. When they've got Sharon and Byrne as well, it just doesn't look particularly solid. So there's a clear area they need to work on, I think, in the transfer window when it opens in the summer, to kind of reinforce, especially if they get in the Champions League again. They can't get by in the Champions League with that defensive setup, I don't think. And Eddie Howe was pretty honest about that second half performance too, which I think Newcastle fans wanted to hear. But do you think they're kind of one of the teams that's more on form in that position now, within that area you're talking about? Are they one of the teams you look at and go, they could probably take more points than their rivals?
Yeah, I think perhaps they are the ones to watch now, just because that squad's got so much talent in it, and they have been there and done it before, and I think that plays a big part. Plus, they've got a bit of momentum behind them from the Carabao Cup run as well. That'll be really... I think there's a lot going for Newcastle this season, and this squad seems really together. You are right, they definitely need to address some of the gaps in it. They know that the centre-back position is one that they need to invest in. They went really heavily for Mark Gahey in the summer, and they wouldn't be doing that if they didn't know that it was a problem position for them. I think they expect Sven Botman to be right up there as one of the best centre-backs in the world one day, because he's still very young, and the injuries have really set him back. and that's been really unfortunate for Newcastle's growth, because he looked like he was going to be a really key player for them. But they still have talent in the squad. I mean, Fabian Schär, I think a lot of people probably thought he would be in and out of Newcastle in a much quicker time, particularly when the new owners came in.
True.
And he's been such a good servant to the club. And he does a job, definitely. It was just in this game, it felt like it was a step too far for them. The organisation of them at the back, with Pope coming back in.
Yeah,
it felt like it was too much change. You are right. I think he looked really off the pace of it. But when you've got the attacking impetus that Newcastle have, and you've got players like Isak that can go and just get you goals at will, it feels like, well, then you can afford to lose 3 goals in the game, really, because they're going to score more than you. It's like Keegan's Entertainers back all over again.
A little bit. You mentioned, obviously, Newcastle being great up front, but shaky in defence for various reasons. Reminds me of another team in the Premier League in a similar position, in your boys, Aston Villa, right? Beat Chelsea 2-1, which is a monumental win, especially with the results, like you say, that have happened around Villa. I think it really helps their push for top 4, and only a few points outside of that now, which is more than kind of recoverable. But it was attack that won over defence, I think, for Villa and saved them. And I said this a couple of pods back, that with the firepower you've got now, especially considering the additions of Rashford and Marlon and Asensio, who was again brilliant, you could really outscore opponents. And that's the way I think it happened in this game. Chelsea looked, again, pretty toothless, had a lot of the ball in the first half. But Marcus Rashford coming on for the second half, and Asensio combining for both goals, was a real kind of marker, really, for your transfer window. I hate saying the team was won the transfer window. You called that quite early, but until results start to happen and performances start to be put in, you don't know. But in retrospect, it looks like Villa have had a good window, doesn't it?
Yeah, superb. You're right. The players that they now have in their artillery that they can bring off the bench, it makes it so difficult for oppositions to know what they're going to come up against, because you've got such a versatile attacking line now. You've got players like Rodgers and Rashford who are really willing to like run at a man and take them on. You've got players like Asensio that wants to unlock everything with a good pass. You've got Marlon and Bailey who are going to run beyond the defenders. There's so much to like going forward for Villa. They maybe are still lacking a bit of clinical edge at times. And obviously they had a bit of a helping hand in the goals this weekend. But when you've got players like that are going to press the issue home and challenge defenders, you are going to get goals from it. And we saw that brilliantly in this game, because Villa's goal difference this season is still -2, because we just defensively have been so weak, and we're missing key players in defensive positions constantly. Another game goes by where a centre-back goes off injured. I think there's like 6 in a row or something ridiculous where a centre-back's had to go off injured. And obviously we're now missing Kamara from the midfield, and we know what he brings to Villa defensively. So you really are looking at those forward players to at least get you through the games. And the introduction of Rashford and Asensio, what incredible additions they are to the squad. Honestly, it feels, so many people have said like it feels like you're playing FIFA career mode and it's jumped forward 4 years to these random transfers. Yeah. But actually what it is Emery looking at the kind of profile of player that Villa really need to be going for to cement consistent European football.
100%.
And it's players with European experience, it's players that are used to winning, and it's players with a point to prove. And that's what those two players are. Asensio's not necessarily at the heights that he was at when he was at Real Madrid. Rashford, obviously, we've talked a lot about his time at Man United. They really want to resurrect their career, and what better platform than a club that is in the Champions League, is fighting to get back into it, has an incredibly good manager, and a fan base where the expectation isn't, I want you to go and win the league every year, but it's just, we're really enjoying this moment we're in. And it seemed like both of them already have settled incredibly well and seem really happy to be playing football for Aston Villa, and that's massive for us.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there's just that feeling of you are not cemented as a top 4 team. Like, it's such a competitive league now that you have to work for it. And obviously with Champions League football, I feel like Villa fans are a lot more realistic about what the league means, but to still be competing for top 4 is a real testament, I think, to Emery in the way he's tried to rotate a fairly threadbare squad at times, but not so threadbare in forward positions. And I think the impact of Rashford, especially coming on the way he did and the impact he had, is exactly the kind of fresh energy that Villa have needed in forward positions as well. They've been crying out for. And he comes in from the left so superbly, doesn't he? And we've seen him at his best do that for United. But the way that Asensio as well read what he was going to do and got in the right positions, especially for that second goal, you can argue that obviously Jorgensen should have done better. But the way he kind of connected with that cross was superb. And that's Rashford getting in those positions in the first place. And seeing him receive that ball when it had been already touched on by the Chelsea defender and then still managed to get a foot to it to divert it in towards Asensio for the equaliser, that was superb too. So his technique's coming back, I think, isn't it? And I think that's the Rashford that I want to see resurrecting his career, wherever they may be too. But for Villa, you're seeing the benefits of a guy that's really hungry to do his best.
Yeah, it feels like there's a touch of confidence to him again.
Yeah.
And that was something that we kept saying was lacking. And I watched a lot of him at the start of the season at Man United, and we said, like, it felt like he was never playing with a smile on his face. It looked like he didn't want to be on the pitch. He looks like he really wants to be there so far, and he looks hungry. Every time he gets the ball, he wants to take the fullback on and get a ball into the box. He's not overly greedy. I mean, his ability to spot a pass, it's fantastic, and you can see why it's never really worked for him as just an out-and-out number 9. He obviously thrives off playing with others, and he needs people on their wavelength. And I think that's the other thing. When you bring in 2 additions of that sort of calibre, they are going to link up well together. They've got a good mutual understanding of each other already, and that seems to have been formed really quickly. That's so encouraging. And you need depth in the squad. Villa are in the middle of a ridiculous fixture pile-up. They asked for the Liverpool game to be moved and were turned down by the Premier League. Now, last week, you and Dave were talking about Villa having a bit of a fall-off with the draw to Ipswich, and whether there had to be a bit of a question to be asked over whether they could push on this year and get European qualification again. What a week Villa have had now off the back of that, because they've used the squad. They've had a few players come back. Konsa was back in this game. That is massive. You saw what he contributed already. Like that goal line clearance from Cole Palmer's effort shows you what it means to have someone who defensively knows his position and can read the game. Because we've been playing players out of position at centre-back. We've been playing partnerships that have never played together. Now we're getting players back. That's huge. And then having the attacking options we've had in January meant we were able to rotate a lot more. So we get a point against Liverpool, which looks like an amazing result after watching what they've done to Man City today. And then 3 points against Chelsea, along with quite a favourable Champions League draw. I think we can say. I don't want to be disrespectful to Club Brugge, but I'd rather that than Dortmund, really. That's a great week for Villa, and all of a sudden it feels like your season is completely turned around in the space of a week, and it's such an interesting campaign for us.
Yeah, you could argue they should have had more goals as well. The challenge, if you can call it that, the assault from Cucurella on Bogart as well, that was completely ignored. How is that not given? I'm not sure, because it seemed pretty obvious to me, quite overly physical. Something reminiscent of the 90s, wasn't it?
What's the point of VAR this season? I saw so many this weekend where it didn't get involved when it absolutely should have, and then it got involved in things that you think, well, that wasn't necessary. Like, I don't know if we'll have time to mention the Man United game too much, but like, you see one there overturned, and you think there is nowhere near enough evidence to overturn this. And then on the flip side, when there's enough evidence to give it and actually fix a situation, it doesn't. Cucurella has got both arms around Bogart and he's literally hanging his weight off him, and it means that he can't swing through to connect with the ball in a goal scoring opportunity. Like, it's not only a foul, it's probably a red card as well. You've denied him an obvious goal scoring opportunity with no attempt to play the ball. I cannot get my head around why VAR doesn't pick that up. If the ref misses it in amongst the entire kind of confusion of the box and a few players going for the ball, fine. But why have we got VAR then?
Yeah, VAR is meant to be for clear and obvious errors, and if that's not a clear and obvious miss, then I don't know what is. But let's not bore people to death with VAR talk, because we've probably got more to speak of throughout the rest of this pod. But we'll finish on Tyrone Mings as well, who obviously went off injured. We don't know the extent of the injury yet, but frustrating to see. Although Pau Torres is apparently back in training very soon, so one step forward, one step back, really, isn't it?
Yeah, constant. The centre-back injuries in particular, it's just crazy what that's done to Villa. I've lost count of how many partnerships we've had this season now. Obviously, Disasi wasn't able to play in this game because it's his parent club, so he'll be back in the next fixture as well, which is good because he looked really good against Liverpool.
Yeah.
And Conte's back, that's huge. You just feel for Mings because he's at an age where he can't afford to be picking up these injuries so regularly and still play at that top level. And actually, there's nothing to say that Minks can't be a really vital part of Villa's defence still. He's still got the ability defensively. He reads the game so well. He's very good at driving forward with the ball. He can pick a really good pass. But it's his knee. His knee just keeps letting him down. And when you start to see those recurring ones, okay, it might not be as serious as the ACL, but if he misses a couple of weeks here and a couple of weeks there, it just adds up after a while. And you think that might be the end of kind of him cementing himself as a starting 11 player for a club like Aston Villa, and actually he might just have to sit back and let Torres take that spot when he's back fit. It's a shame.
Well, 3 points nonetheless, mate, and a huge 3 points for Villa. Massive result. Let's go on to the top 2 challenges in the Premier League, shall we? And the end of the title race, maybe. We've said this a few times. False dawns for Arsenal keep coming, and then setbacks keep happening. Obviously, they're struggling with forwards being injured. Obviously, we said at the moment, Mikel Merino came in brilliantly last week against Leicester, scored a couple of goals and started in this game against West Ham, but it was a pretty toothless display from the Gunners, all said and done, really, wasn't it? And obviously a red card to Lewis Skelly didn't help, which we'll talk about in a moment. But 1-0 lost for Arsenal is kind of probably the end. I don't know. Is that insurmountable now in the title race, do you reckon?
It feels it, doesn't it? And they've missed a massive opportunity. Liverpool have dropped points against Everton and Villa. And you think, right, they're playing City on the Sunday, you're playing early on the Saturday. You've got time now to really get that gap as close as possible. And all of a sudden, it might make Liverpool nervous in that City game. Instead, it feels like they handed them the league title. Definitely. It's such a poor game to drop points in. West Ham have not been the most inspiring team this season, and they looked really strong against Arsenal, and it felt like a lot of the Arsenal players just weren't up for it. You hate to constantly say that when Arsenal lose it, or if they fall behind in the title, it's a mentality thing, but it felt like that. Again, It just felt like they didn't have their head in the game for it.
What is the mentality then? That's the question for me. Obviously, they're missing that focal point in attack. But, I mean, the strength they've got elsewhere should be enough. I mean, West Ham have had their own injury issues up front as well, but they just adapt. You know, they get more out of Jared Bowen, they get more out of Mohamed Kudus. You know, they bring in someone like Evan Ferguson, which, again, crucially, Arsenal never did. They missed out on bringing out a forward in January. So what is it about Arsenal that's proving frustrating? Because Arteta said it himself, you know, he's furious with the way things have gone. This is not what title contenders do. Clearly it's not. How are they not kicking on this season, mate, in a nutshell?
It feels like confidence, doesn't it? It feels like there's always so much noise around the club, whether it's the fan base, the media commenting on what they're missing, the fact that they've missed out on 2 titles in quite tight races.
Yeah.
It feels like they feel like they're never going to get over the line, and it shows on the pitch. Like, I look at someone like Odegaard, who last season, alongside Phil Foden, was probably the best player in the league. And he just looks so shot of confidence now that you never think he's going to do anything. You look at Sterling in the last game, and then he comes off the bench. He's not going to do anything. You've got these players that you know they're capable of these moments of magic, and we're not seeing them. And that's the difference between them and Liverpool this season. Even if a game is difficult, even if a team is set up with a low block, even if there are defensive teams frustrating them, they've got players capable of moments of magic. Arsenal have that in Saka, and it seems like no one else. It seems like no one else is capable of getting a game and just turning it around for them. Typically, another player that does that for them, and when the rest of the team seems to have let their head drop, will pick up the ball, drive forward, and go for something, is Declan Rice. He had a really poor game in this game, and it feels like he hates playing West Ham sometimes. It's the second year in a row West Ham have won at the Emirates, and you can't tell me that either of them should be West Ham wins going into it. No. It just feels like Arsenal let too much get to them. I mean, they have 5 red cards this season now as well? Like a ridiculous amount since Arteta's been in charge. It just feels like they can't get their head round the competitive edge of this league sometimes. They've got quality, they play really nice football at times, but when it gets serious and when those moments really come in where they could take a hold of the league, they just can't do it.
No. Well, 20 shots and only 2 on target, no goals, sort of tells a story, doesn't it? They just don't find a way, and they're not finding a way at the minute to get out of this rut that they're in. And yeah, frustrating for Arsenal. But the red card didn't help, of course. Lewis Skelly took down the last man. You can't really say he didn't do that. There was obviously a defender quite far away who could have potentially maybe caught up. I think the keeper was off his line as well. But there's no
Raya's positioning was crazy.
It was,
That was why it was a red card, because David Raya was so far from his goal that Kudus basically had a tap in from the halfway line. It was bizarre positional play from him.
But that's naive from Lewis Skelly, I think, because he should have just let it play out. I think he did it because the instinct is to stop your player from escaping, because you know he's probably through on goal. But I would rather have just let the game flow and see what happens. I think an experienced defender would have done that.
Maybe. I think if he saw Raya's positioning and knew that it was certain that they would basically be 2 down at that point, I do wonder whether that motivated him slightly. And also, I think he gave the ball away, didn't he? And you always want to atone for that error.
True.
He's overcommitted doing it. It's unfortunate. It's one of those, isn't it? It's so unfortunate. And then it just means that the rest of the game felt like it was done. Because Lewis Skelly, he's been great for Arsenal. He's been absolutely huge for him. He got a well-deserved rest in this game because they're looking to not burn these young players out. And then Nwaneri goes off injured and Lewis Skelly gets sent off. It's not good, because they're the 2 players that do look confident for Arsenal at the moment, and now they've got that to deal with. So it's going to be tough for the rest of the season now. They just need to cement that second place and put all their efforts into the Champions League. Because, again, they've got PSV in the next round. If they win that, it's likely they'll have Real Madrid. That's basically where their season hangs now, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, on the other hand, West Ham are not in danger of relegation, I don't think, because Wolves are, 8 points behind them, and then Ipswich are a further, 13 points behind them as well. So it feels like they're in that zone where United and Everton are at the minute, where there's nothing to play for in the league apart from just trying to improve the way you play. And I think for Graham Potter, this was an interesting kind of experiment and an interesting way to see how his team performed against the top team. And they did pretty well, to be fair. West Ham, transitional season for them. It's going to be that way, I think, till the end of the season. But they've got some positives there, haven't they? Their attack looks really good.
Yeah, and actually, the thing that Potter always will try and do is get a team to be well established defensively. And West Ham haven't been that this season, really. And they were in this game. They seemed to be really well organised. They didn't let Arsenal break them down. They kept that low block really, really solid at times. And then were really prepared for the counter-attack as well, because they kept the width without they had 2 wide forwards with Jarrod Bowen and Kudus kind of playing more centrally, and let Wan-Bissaka be all the width on the right-hand side. And he was fantastic. And he used his pace to counter-attack consistently. And we saw the goal. Bowen picks the ball up just outside his own area.
Yeah.
Look how quickly they turned that over, because they were able to start with a solid foundation, keep a really good defensive shape, stop Arsenal from making too much progress, but then was so ready to turn it over. Potter will definitely look to exploit that through the rest of the season. He will want his team to just concede as little as possible.
Yeah.
And they have got players that are really, really well versed in counter-attacking football. And someone like Bowen, someone like Kudus can take a team apart really clearly. I mean, look how confident West Ham look. Kudus is doing like pirouettes and little flicks in the middle of the pitch at 1-0 away at the Emirates. It feels like there is a team there that we said at the start of the season, we expected West Ham to do really well this year and get themselves into the European conversation. That's a really good squad if you use it properly. Potter's trying to work that out still, isn't he?
He is, but I think there's a template there in Nottingham Forest to see how you can play that way, defend really resolutely and attack with a really great counter-attacking move. And I think West Ham got the players to do that, haven't they? But for Arsenal, another frustration, and a season that still holds a lot of unknown, because the Champions League is going to be difficult as well, and they need to get players back to full fitness, really, because Liverpool look like they are feeling no pressure at the minute. They're kind of a reflection of their manager, aren't they? Arne Slot's just a serene picture on the touchline. He looks so calm with everything. Obviously, it helps going into the Super Sunday clash with Man City away as well, knowing that they could afford to slip up. I think that definitely helped that result look a lot more calm. But that aside, City gave it quite a good go against Liverpool, but they were so I don't know, just brushed them away, didn't they? So professionally. It was a professional performance from Liverpool and a deserved win, I think, and a marker of how good they are.
Yeah, it didn't feel like they had to do a lot,
No.
really, Liverpool, did it? They were just great in moments, and that's all they needed to be. They needed to stop City from creating anything, and they did that, really. And then just utilise the moments that they had. And when you've got players like Salah in the form that he's in, capable of getting a goal and an assist in any game, it feels like, yeah, you are going to win these games. They were brilliant in the first half. I think that was when they wanted to take the game to City a bit more. They wanted to be a bit more clinical. They wanted to take some of the attacking impetus and make sure they held on to it. The second half, they were really happy for City to have the ball because they knew that they weren't really going to be threatened at any point. I mean, there are a few things you really noticed, like patterns. Doku was beating Trent every 5 seconds, but then doing nothing with it. Was being really well covered by Salah. Defensively did really well.
True.
Gravenberch did really well. And then Endo, when he came on, was mopping those things up. So every time Trent went for a bit of a wander or got caught out by his winger, there was someone else there. And Liverpool just feel like they have got that unity and they've got that understanding on the pitch now that, yeah, it's not a surprise to see him do the double over Man City this season because they're so much more controlled than Man City are.
Yeah, well, Salah's having the season of his life, isn't he? And I think with the contract obviously not being resolved and probably not going to be now, it's at that late stage of the season, he's going out on an absolute high if that's the case. But him and Szoboszlai both assisting each other to a goal apiece in the first half killed the game, really. And I know City had all the possession, but had nothing really to answer it. And me and Dave talked about how good Omar Marmoush was with his hat-trick in the last game. He had very little service in this game, I think, although Doku did play pretty well. But they didn't seem like the same slick City that we know. They are in a huge transition right now, City, aren't they?
It feels like City are still trying to play this like brand of Guardiola total football, where they've got this fluidity that players can play anywhere on the pitch. But actually, none of the players are playing well enough to do that successfully.
No.
So it looks really disjointed. So like there was moments in the first half, I looked and I was like, why is Nathan Ake up front? And then because they're doing that, Liverpool are really exploiting that and able to turn things over really quickly. You've got the entire Man City team out of any sort of shape that you would establish as a good team, and it meant it was so easy for Liverpool to play through them, and they were going through the middle so successfully because City have got this idea still of like, right, well, we'll bring Rico Lewis into midfield and we'll outnumber players there, but he's not really playing well enough to do that. They brought in this Nico Gonzalez to replace Rodri, and yeah, he'll do a good job there, and I'm sure he'll develop. But right now, it's not what you need. De Bruyne looks off it. Foden doesn't really know what space to occupy. Marmoush was kind of a number 9, but also out wide. No one seemed to have a job, and it feels like City just need to go back to some really basic ideas of this is where you need to be on the pitch. Stay there, because they're getting exploited so easily when they're trying that fluid approach to break teams down, and actually all it's doing is breaking themselves down and losing all of their own shape. They aren't as good as they've been before. The players that they have right now are not as good as the Man City players of the last few years. They're missing a prime Kyle Walker. They're missing a prime Rodri, even a prime De Bruyne. Without that, it's really hard to play like those players are still there because you get found out. And Liverpool was so good at just waiting for Man City to kind of undo themselves and then just going, right, well, now we'll come at you. And then the rest of the game, they went, fine, have the ball, because I'm not worried about anything that you're going to create from this. And that's so telling. It felt like a real, passing of the torch this game, didn't it?
A little bit, yeah. But I think it also highlights, as if we needed it highlighted anymore, how important Rodri is, because I think he would have changed that result. I think he would have added a bit more to City's midfield. But yeah, a huge player for them, and a season that's going to be hinging, I think, on the results around them, like so many other teams in that position. It's all dependent on other teams, isn't it? And I mean, obviously Villa are in the same boat, but I'm not sure whether City can hit top 4. You were talking about them finishing second earlier on, a few games back.
I still feel like there's enough in that squad that you wouldn't put it past them to go on a run at some point, but they're going to struggle against teams that are as good as Liverpool. They did against Real Madrid. When they come up against the best, they're going to get unstuck because they aren't good enough for it. They aren't systemically strong enough, which is such a weird thing to say about Man City.
Of course it is,
who have been the system team of the last 5 years, you'd say. But then on the flip side of that, they've got enough to beat any other team in the Premier League right now. They've played Arsenal and Liverpool. Every other fixture, you can see City winning them all. Of course you can. Because they have got individual brilliance in players like Marmoush. But they're not going to be competing for major honours until they can fix this bizarre approach to games they're taking and sort that midfield out. Because it's terrible. Like, Gundogan has been awful since he came back. Kovacic does not do the job that they need him to do. De Bruyne looks like he's lost 10 yards of pace and just isn't able to read the game the same. So they are going to struggle in areas. But again, mentality-wise, when it gets tough towards the end of the season, I wouldn't be surprised to watch them put a run together and fly up the league.
No. Well, the scale of the drop-off, I think, is the speed of it is the surprising thing. But I can't talk. I'm a Manchester United fan, and I think I'll segue onto that next as we talk through the best of the rest. Everton 2, Man United 2, the battle for 15th place, whatever you want to call it. United were terrible in the first half, suicidal defending, but credit they fought back in the second half and showed a bit of spirit. David Moyes has had a great return to Goodison, hasn't he? And I think he's overseeing this final run of games at Goodison in a really positive light. And I'm kind of pleased for Everton for that. They've had a really tough few seasons. But on the other side of the dugout, the other dugout, you've got obviously Ruben Amorim looking completely distraught as well. How does this look to you from the outsider looking in at Amorim's body language and the way United are playing and this system just failing? I mean, how do you see it? Me and Dave have spoken at length, but what do you think?
It's just embarrassing. Like, I feel nothing but pity for Amorim, to be fair, because he's come in at such a weird time with a really poor group of players. He's not really had anything to do in January to strengthen it. They're obviously waiting to the summer. They wrote this season off before he got there at like a ridiculously early stage. He's not helped himself because he himself has written off players that perhaps he shouldn't have. I mean, we talk about the new lease of life Rashford's got. You're telling me he couldn't have had that at Man United with the right coach? And United are lacking so much. They're identifying problems across the squad, and it feels like they're running out of space on the sheet to work them out. And you'll get results like this one because they were awful. They deserve nothing from this game. But you've got players like Bruno who can kind of get something from nothing. Agate had a moment of brilliance to kind of get the equaliser as well. They still should have lost this game, though.
No.
They absolutely should have lost this game. The idea that they fought back in the second half, I don't even really think they did. They just weren't quite as bad as they were in the first half, and 2 moments sorted them out, along with a refereeing decision, which I can't get my head around.
Well, Ashley Young's reputation for diving definitely preceded him, isn't he? And I think that's what saved United, I think, from conceding a late penalty. Do you know what the narrative felt like? Like a late penalty and losing in that way would have been absolutely where United are at this season. And I would have been totally like, yeah, it's the way it is. It's the apathy from United fans that's really shocking. But yeah, Everton could have won it. Probably should have done, really.
If United don't go through the next round of the Europa League, does he make the end of the season, Amorim?
It's in his hands.
This is bad.
It's in his hands. I don't think the board are in a position, financially, first of all, to kind of end his contract. But also, he said from moment one, this is the way it's going to be. This is my system. I'm not veering from that. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think the board have to suck that up. That's more whether he walks, because I think his reputation is getting lower and lower the longer he stays there, as United do to players and coaches. And it's whether he realises the grass isn't greener on the other side after all. It's a huge challenge, but I think the lure of turning it around is what's keeping him there, because I think he feels like he could do it. I think he's an intelligent enough coach to be able to do it, but whether we stave off things like relegation in the meantime, I don't know, because financially we need an income. Like, we need a European qualification every season at least to maintain the wage bill we've got. Otherwise, it's going to be wholesale changes, but that won't be a bad thing. There's only maybe a handful of players that deserve to be there, I think. So
I just think, I look at the league table now, the 3 teams above you are Everton, Palace and Spurs, who are all finding form at the moment and getting results, right? And then the 2 teams underneath you are West Ham and Wolves, equally, are both looking to kick on, new managers, try and do something. United can't finish 17th this season and only stay up because the 3 promoted teams were so bad. That's mental. This is Man United. They cannot afford that. So does it get to a point where it's so bad that Amorim's job becomes untenable? Because this is... I watch Man United every week expecting them to lose.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
And as to your question, I don't know. And that's the rest of the season will be like that. The unknown, is this the lowest we will go? Is this the worst it's going to get? It's Amorim on borrowed time, which is crazy again to say. We're looking to him to save the club and to turn it around. Honestly, don't know, but it is bad. There's no doubt it's bad. But, I mean, Tottenham have turned it around. They won 4-1 at Ipswich, trying to move on swiftly.
Yeah, fair.
Quite, a few players coming back into the team as well. Jed Spence playing really well since he's been a regular starter for Spurs. Udogie back in, Vicario back in. Kulusevski still being Kulusevski. 4-1 was a good result for Spurs, and they needed that too, didn't they?
Yeah, the return of those players is massive. It is so big. Obviously, they made a few additions in January with Mateus Tell and Kevin Danso that they really needed. The midfield still looks a little light, but having some squad depth, that's going to be huge for Spurs towards the end of the season. It's just typical that it's done at a stage where the season's kind of over already.
Yeah.
They're like United, really. Every single thing they've got has to go into the Europa League now. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that I've seen enough from Spurs to think that they'll really compete for that. But at least now the league form has picked up enough that they'll finish mid-table this year and they're not looking over their shoulder like Man United are. And that's big. That is big. I know it doesn't feel significant, the idea of the difference between finishing 10th and 14th isn't a lot. But for pride, if they get themselves at least back into it and they can blame the injuries, then at least you can say that this group of players there's something there still.
Yeah, this group of players is good. I mean, you look at that team sheet, and even when they were apparently their weakest, how many Man United players were getting to that team? Not many. Maybe Bruno Fernandes, but then you've got James Maddison who can do that. You've got Kulusevski who can do that. No, so it's a good team and it's a good squad. So I think maybe Andrew's job is safe. Maybe even beyond the summer. Maybe they can see the bigger picture. Who knows? But yeah, Spurs
they rode that wave.
Yeah, Spurs definitely rode that wave. Another couple of interesting results. Obviously, Bournemouth losing 1-0 to Wolves. Massive for Wolves. Cunha digging them out again. But a Zabarnyi red card, meaning that your direct rivals for a top 4, top 5 place lose, which is good to see for you. Crystal Palace 2, Fulham 0. Another team there or thereabouts. Fulham losing points. But Crystal Palace looking good. I think Daniel Munoz especially scoring, playing really well.
Yeah, that finish was incredible. And Palace feel like the Palace we started to see at the end of last season again.
Yeah,
feels like they've really got that rhythm back, and half of that is Mateta's form. He's been so good lately. I wouldn't be surprised if a few clubs that are looking at number 9s that are maybe keeping an eye on him at the moment as well, because he looks like a really lethal forward. And Palace have got quite a few players around now, like you mentioned Munoz. Lacroix scores in this game, and he looks like he's been a really good addition. It's a strong squad, Palace. I mean, we've got him midweek. I'm really interested to see how we get on with it.
Yeah, well, you've got Brighton breathing down your necks as well. They beat Southampton 4-0. Brighton looking good on their day.
That was embarrassing.
It was, yeah, but Southampton continue to set the bar, don't they? And again, we're talking about the relegation picture, but that's been decided well in advance. I think it was decided even a few weeks ago. It just looked like there was an illusion of a fight there, but Wolves were never really in the conversation. But Brighton doing brilliantly. And then Brentford 4, Leicester 0 is another example of that disparity in the Premier League right now. Leicester looked terrible. I don't think this is much to do with Ruud van Nistelrooy, to be fair. I just think the board made the wrong decision to sack Steve Cooper, and I think that looks more obvious now because he probably could have made them a bit more difficult to beat than this, because they looked terrible, didn't they? 4-0 at 3-0 at half time, wasn't it? I thought this was going to be a crushing defeat for them.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse. Leicester have had such a weird time of it. They've gone back to the Premier League, been kind of hamstrung with how much they could spend, changed managers twice, not done anything in January, and there's no surprise that they are where they are in the league. Not. And it's so frustrating. If I'm Van Nistelrooy, I'm thinking, why did I take this job? Because there must have been a better job that he could have got, even if it's outside of England. Yes, the money will be good, but what are Leicester hoping to do? Go down, come back up next year?
Well, it depends if they do.
That could be their only aim.
They've got financial troubles when they get back into the EFL as well. So, whether they recover from that and how much that hits them, we don't know. What penalty they get for their financial breaches, who knows? But Yeah, Leicester are almost the definition of a yo-yo club at the minute, even if the points deduction doesn't happen. But you can see them kind of being good enough to come back up, but not good enough to stay in the league. It's the story of the Premier League relegation zone over the last few seasons, isn't it? And
absolutely
strange to see. But that's all we've got time for this week's pod, Miles. What are you looking forward to for the week ahead?
Well, more fixture congestion for Villa. We're playing again Tuesday, but hopefully we can get another result there. I get to see Rashford playing a Villa shirt again. That's the main thing at the moment.
I still can't really get my head around seeing that. You know, he's a Manchester guy. He's United through and through.
Not anymore, mate.
It was interesting to see him and Sancho facing off, wasn't it, in the Chelsea game? Because Sancho just didn't look bothered by losing either. I feel like he's no way back for him. Chelsea's stuck with him, which is kind of funny.
I wonder if he'll go somewhere else in the summer. I wonder if Chelsea try and get rid of him straight away. They're a funny club, Chelsea, but we ain't got time for that.
That's by the by. That's for another pod.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. Please do follow, like, subscribe on all our channels that we're on. TikTok, we're on Blue Sky. Obviously here on YouTube and every audio channel too. It's great to hear from you all. But until next time, mate, enjoy your week. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, mate. See you later.
See you later.